Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim McNamee. I'm the Vice President at Mastery Prep. And for those of you that don't know us, Mastery Prep partners with thousands of schools and school districts to provide meaningful, measurable academic support that boosts standardized assessment scores without teaching to the test. And that all comes at no cost to students and their families. And also on this session today, there is somebody that earned perfect scores on both the ACT and SAT, but I'm not going to tell you who that is. So speaking of the ACT, today we're talking about the recent announcement regarding the changes being made to the ACT itself. And I'm going to share my screen with everybody here since the test is evolving. And just full disclosure, many of our own customers, as well as school districts across the country, prioritize the ACT for their students when it comes to college readiness. And in many cases, scores from the ACT are an important contributor to their accountability metrics. Joining me today is Oliver Pope, Chief Product Officer here at Mastery Prep, and our founder and CEO, Craig Garrett. In this session, we will be discussing the two big changes to the ACT, when these changes will take effect, what will remain the same, strategies to consider when preparing students moving forward, and we'll close out with some Q&A. So to kick things off, let's jump into the two big changes that have been announced. So Craig, Oliver, what are the changes and what does this mean for educators and students?
Let you take that one, Oliver.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the way that the ACT is approaching this, they have a strategy of taking the test, making it a bit more approachable for students. They want to make it shorter. They want to make it something that students can complete with a little bit less of like a all day commitment. And so the big changes they're making, first point is they're making the science section optional. So if you're familiar with how the writing section is handled for the ACT, currently it's something that's like an add-on that some colleges want to see and some accountability wants to see. What ACT is doing is they're making that same thing for science, which means that the composite score that we all know and love no longer is going to be an average of math, English, reading, and science. It's just going to be an average of math, English, and reading. So science will be like a bonus additional section. So we'll be more on that when we talk about like strategy, but it's technically going to be an optional section given out by ACT. The other change, so that right off the bat shortens the exam if you take what they're calling the core exam, which is now just going to be English, math, and reading. The other major change that they're making is that they are shortening the length of the passages and the number of questions for the reading and the writing section, reading and English sections. So if you're familiar with, the traditional 4 passages, they're typically around 850 words or so. What they're talking about doing is shortening that up a pretty good bit. We're still waiting on like final specs on that, but I think that I've heard talk about like 450 word passage length, possibly something in that range. So not quite as short as you're seeing on digital SAT, but definitely like a noticeable difference versus the current ACT. And so, those are the major changes that has some impact. I do want to emphasize, we'll talk about timeline. This is for the 2026 spring for school-based administration. So we have a little bit of time to prepare for it. But those changes as far as impact for your students, it's going to be, we're still cautious. We're cautiously optimistic. We like what ACT does with their exams and how they approach things. I think it's going to be a net benefit for students. I'm especially excited about the opportunity for the reading and the English sections. But, obviously it's going to be a change. There'll be some strategic changes and there'll be some, I think overall a positive impact for students for the ACT.
That's great. So you obviously mentioned that the changes themselves, which we're seeing here on the screen. So the test will be shorter, science will now be optional, and then you actually mentioned something about 2026, which brings us into the timing of changes. So as you mentioned, and what I've seen, both of these changes, along with other enhancements to modernize the test, will roll out starting with national online testing in spring of 2025, and then for school day testing in spring 2026, like you mentioned. Could you talk a little bit more about the timing of these changes and what it means for schools and districts and how they should be thinking about it concerning the staggered approach?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So for this school year, if you're doing school-based testing, right? So if you're in a state where the state pays for the testing, or if you're in a state where districts choose and they get reimbursed for doing testing, and it happens during the school day on site, then there's no change that you need to deal with in this upcoming school year, in the 2024-25 school year. And the time that you need to start getting students ready after that administration, going into the 25-26 school year, you want to be preparing students for the new format because school-based testing in spring 2026 will be in the new format. So if you're doing school-based testing, it's good to start learning about this, but there's no changes in this school year. It's really next school year where you want to start getting students ready. Now, if you are an educator who is helping students who are mostly doing individual testing, they're going on the national test days and getting their scores, then they'll be experiencing a new test at the test centers, at the test locations in the spring of 2025. And so Mastery Prep is going to make this really easy for everyone who's using Mastery Prep to use our resources. So at the end of this school year, we'll have all new resources available for next school year to help you ready with school-based testing. And we'll also have some resources early for programs that are helping students with national test days. We'll have some resources. For example, we'll be updating our Decoding the ACT Professional Development Program and that'll help get you conversant with all the changes and everything that's coming up.
That's great. And now, here's a simple one. What's going to remain the same?
Yeah, so we'll talk a bit about that. So obviously, there's still a lot of information needs to come out from ACT for us to be, extraordinarily confident about the exact nature of the changes. But one of the things that they've been really clear about is they are not going to be making changes to the standard alignments. And so what we're seeing on the ACT is it's still going to cover all of the core standards that we know, the college and career readiness standards that we're familiar with. And so, it'll be shorter, but we can feel pretty confident that you're still going to see things like verb tense and conciseness and systems of equations. The science skills, even though it'll be optional, that test is still going to have the same core skill offerings. And so this works really well if you're a school-based program, because if you're thinking about your scope and sequence and how you are integrating ACT prep into your day-to-day classroom, that standard alignment is going to stay valid and stay the same. And so that's, the thing that we want to keep our mind on is the core of the content of the experience is going to be the same overall.
And to further that point too, also another element is the composite scoring is remaining exactly the same as well. Correct.
So the composite scoring is going to remain the same in that you'll have that 1 to 36 score, and it'll be a composite, but the big difference is that science will be excluded from that. So, that is a change if you are, in the situation where science is dragging down your composite or science is boosting your composite, that does change how you think about your overall strategy. But generally speaking, science has always been an odd fit for ACT. It doesn't have the same kind of natural crosswalk to a typical state standard set because they're very process oriented. They're not as content oriented. They're not like biology standards, they're more like science, like methodology standards. So my guess is that actually won't be that big of an impact in terms of the standard alignments and scope and sequence.
Okay, so now this is kind of our territory. So Mastery Prep is licensed by ACT Inc. So we're allowed to use official test questions within our ACT solutions for school districts and partners. And we do support a lot of customers with mastery-based comprehensive solutions. So Oliver, I'm excited that you're with us today because could you shed, and it's early, the announcement just came out, but could you shed some light on the use of current product and possibly the upcoming transition to new solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is early, but we're trying to be on the ball right away. I'll open with, I think a very important piece is that, like Craig mentioned, if you are a school day testing entity, if you're preparing for school-based testing, nothing changes for you for this year, like this school year, this upcoming ACT administration in the spring. So your plan is going to stay the same. And so at Mastery Prep, we offer a comprehensive solution. It's the only completely full spectrum solution for schools. That is our entire game plan. which means that we have professional development, student-facing workshops, practice exams, like you said, licensed from ACT, they're real ACT tests. We have bell ringers, we have on-demand curriculum, print curriculum. And so we have a wide offering of resources. All of that works together as a system for the modern current ACT. It's very, very tightly aligned to that. And that is still going to be your strategy for this next school year, this current school year. So I want to reiterate that because sometimes when all these changes come about, it's really easy to get almost kind of panicked and rushed about the changes and hungry for information. And we need to be paying attention and learning about it, but you also want to stay focused on your current testers who are going to be coming up in that spring administration. But as Craig alluded to, going into the next school year, so in the 25-26 school year, we're going to have a completely remastered ACT program. So everything that we offer that if you're one of our customers you know and love, or if you're not one of our customers and you're curious about professional development, those workshops, everything's going to be remastered for the new form factor for the ACT. So there'll be new practice content, new practice tests, new professional development, new workshops, new print materials, on demand. Everything's going to be updated going into the 2026 school year. And as Craig suggested, because we do have some customers who are going to be helping students who are taking that national test, we are going to have resources that are going to come earlier than that. So we're looking at our workshops for students and then our professional development for teachers coming a little earlier in the next year.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'd also like to mention that for those watching or listening, that we'll be hosting a series of live webinars to go over new ACT solutions and strategies in more detail across the next few months, just to ensure everyone is set up and comfortable, but also to give everyone a chance to share feedback, ask questions. So stay tuned for those dates. And if you want more information, you can visit masteryprep.com. Okay, so let's move on to some questions we received prior to jumping on video here today. A few customers from different states had sent some things in, obviously the news being public, and you may have addressed this earlier in the discussion today, but you hit it on the head. Where does the question that came in from a particular state, actually I think this one came in from Tennessee, does this shift change alignment to standards? And
it's a great question, and like Oliver said, there's no talk about changing the ACT college and career readiness standards. There's no talk about testing differently. It's all about form factor. That being said, anytime there's a change to a test form factor, even if they're not changing what content is tested, there can be a shift in what's weighted more heavily, right? What items and types of items and standards are more important than others. There are some ACT college readiness standards that are extremely high value. In our professional development, we call them tier 1 standards that make a big impact on student scores. They know for sure they're going to come up on every test. There's some that are tier 5 where they almost never show up. They might show up once every 4 tests or 5 tests. And what those standards are and what are the most important, what the standards are probably going to stay the same. What is a tier 1 might change. And so that's one thing that our R&D team is going to be looking at is when the blueprint comes out, when the sample tests come out, when ACT provides more information on that front, we'll be reevaluating our guidance on that to help teachers know what are the real high impact standards and content areas they can focus on.
Okay. Another question that came in. Will this change my existing plan for students, aka the scope and sequence that I have for preparing the class?
Yeah, so I think we hit on this a little bit, but I think it's worth reiterating because it's so important. The change that we're going to be seeing on the ACT is happening at in the national testing in 2025 spring, but it won't be impacting school-based testing until 2026. So the immediate answer is for this school year, like this year that you're preparing for, almost every one of our customers, every person in a school-based environment, you're taking that school-based test, that school day testing, you will not be impacted. And so if you're thinking about your current plans, they haven't been blown up on the launch pad. You get to execute what you've been doing over the summer. That's going to still be relevant. It's still going to be helpful for your students and targeted. If you are using curriculum, if you're using a MasterPrep curriculum, for example, that's still going to be very relevant. And so you won't have to make like a rapid whiplash change. But as Craig suggested, though, you do want to be thinking about the next year. And as we all know, those are not things that you do in July of 2025, right? It's going to be something you're going to start thinking about now, start reaching out and learning and paying attention to what, how companies are approaching the ACT. And like, for example, what we're doing at MasterPrep, you should be paying attention as we're updating our curriculum as you're getting ready for that upcoming school year. And then thinking about early professional development, getting your teachers who, once they've cleared their spring test, start thinking about preparing them for going into the summer and maybe even and over the summer as well.
All right, thank you for that. This was actually one of my favorite ones that came through. I'm from a district that offers both the digital SAT and ACT. Does this new ACT format make it easier or harder than the digital SAT?
It's at a surface level, what the digital SAT is now and what the ACT is becoming have some similar themes, right? So they're both shorter tests now. The new ACT will be a shorter test. They're both allowing for more time per question. They're shortening passages, right? When you zoom in, though, these are still two, and there's a lot of overlap in the content that they cover. But when you zoom in, these are still two significantly different tests for a number of reasons. One, digital SAT has now extremely short passages with single questions, right? Whereas on the ACT, there will still be long format. They're shorter, but there's still a long format passage with multiple questions associated with it. What is focused on and weighted in the math part of the test is different.
Right.
The math is weighted more heavily on the SAT for a composite score than it is on the ACT. And what that means is that, and these are both nationally normed tests. So at a very macro level, it's really easy to say that neither test is harder than the other, right? Because they're looking at it from these tests are calibrated against the nation. But for any given student, one test might be harder than another or showcase talents in a different way. I predict that one thing is that the science test being optional might actually make it more important of an aspect for the ACT because it's going to allow students who are pursuing a STEM degree to send a clear signal to the admissions office that they're serious about science and show their performance there, right? So that's going to be a clear differentiator there. Students who struggle in math in particular are going to benefit some from the way the weighting works on the ACT side. So they're just different tests. Now, that being said, this question kind of started with our district offers both the digital SAT and ACT. The content that you prepare students for is going to help with both tests, right? Like there's a huge amount of overlap on the content. But I do want to highlight that one of Mastery Prep's core recommendations for school districts is that even if you make both available, that you you focus on one form factor for preparing your students and really try to build students up to that specific form factor. It's really tough if you have a workshop and in the same day you're saying, remember this time limit for the ACT and this one for the SAT and try to do this here, but that's not going to show up there, right? Like it's, in terms of preparation, you want to pick a lane and you're going to get better test preparedness through that path.
Perfect. Last question for you guys. Since there are a couple dates for the changes to roll out, should I rush my current class to get them to take the current ACT or pivot to the new one? And are there any new strategies that are relevant? Any old ones going away?
That's an interesting question. So, one thing I'll actually work backwards on that, and maybe Craig, we can kind of tag team that one. It's a kind of a complex question, but I'll start with strategies. One of the things that's a core aspect of our approach to taking any exam is time mastery, especially any timed exam, any speeded test. It's important you have the time mastery component there. And what they're talking about there is how you manage your time, how you manage your stamina, how you devote like your minutes per question, like all these different variables when you move on from one section to the next within a test. And that's going to be impacted by the change, because right off the bat, if you look at what they're stating, the intention of the exam is to take away a little bit of the pressure, a little bit of the time pressure that ACT is so famous for. And so there's going to be a difference in time mastery. I don't like to think of it as necessarily as simple as it becoming like an easier timed exam, because students know how to waste time on tests. They can waste time on an untimed test. It's possible. And so it's important that what we're going to be doing is just changing how we approach it, maybe what we emphasize, how much stamina is important. That might decrease, but we may have more focused on like high quality experiences with the test and focus on pacing. So that's one that would be changed. And then, as Craig suggested, when we start doing our frequency analysis on these actual exams, our approach to content mastery may also shift. You might see that tier 1 become a tier 2. I'm hopeful to see the tier 5s that almost never show up. It might come back and have a resurgence, and we'll get to see maybe we'll see super lists from semicolons on the ACT. That'd be cool. But whatever we see, like at the end of the day, it's going to be, there will be some changes to the content frequency. Test mastery is an interesting one, because a lot of like how you approach a test, we call it test mastery, is how you approach a test. That's inherently going to be changed by the structure and the form factor. So shortening the passages is probably going to open up some new techniques. It's probably going to eliminate the need for some of the more complicated reading methodologies, because you'll have a shorter passage. You'll be able to reference a bit quicker, a bit easier. So we'll probably have an emphasis on referencing. So these are all things that are going to shake out when we actually get our hands on some of the more detailed specifications. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be the same core thought process around this kind of an exam. It's kind of nationally normed test. It's like you have to manage your timing. You have to manage the format of the exam. You have to learn the test itself, like the way they ask questions, the way they develop distractor choices. And you have to learn the content, and you have to have a content strategy that aligns to the standards you're seeing on the exam. So I think all of that's going to stay the same. It'll be a lot of execution changes that, obviously you want to stay aware of and be brought up to speed on.
And I'll add to that, anytime you get more time per question, then it rewards a student who can be a little more thorough, right? It rewards a student who takes the time to check their work to improve their accuracy. It rewards a student who's stuck, who then applies the process of elimination, which sometimes, especially in math or in reading, can be time consuming, but can get you to the right answer when you don't have another pathway, right? And so however, test taking skills and test mastery is not naturally developing. It takes intentional instruction and support to get a student there. And so you're going to see a continued commitment and a double down from Mastery Prep, doubling down on teaching those skills and modeling those skills for students and helping them develop it along with the content mastery. Now, the other part of the question, should I rush my current class to get them to take the current ACT or pivot to the new one? If you have school-based testing, then for this school year, you should be learning about the new tests, but you should not be talking with your students about that, right? Everything should be orienting towards the current form factor, which is going to be for the school-based test day, right? Now, there are going to be some students who take the school-based test day, and then they want to, when they're seniors, they're going to get to take the new test, and that's great, and we'll help you support that. But I would just stay really focused on the current form factor, because it takes a lot for students to get to a comfort level with one. If they start trying to think about having two different tests that they're dealing with at the same time, I mean, our experts only work on developing programs for one test at a time for exactly that same reason, and they do tests all day, right? So like, we don't want students having to think about how many passages are there and how much time, and you just want to focus on that school-based administration and that existing test form factor. If you are a parent, you're just watching this, you're not in a school-based test day, I would definitely want to get my kid to take the old one at least once, because it's sort of a free shot, right? Take the old one before the switch over, take the new one after, and it just gives you a couple different looks. And so, and maybe your student does inherently better at the old one or the new one. It's a small price to pay, that registration fee, to get an extra shot at a very strong score.
Well, Oliver, Craig, thanks for joining and talking about the changes to the ACT. For everyone tuning in right now, be on the lookout for some live sessions that you can join regarding strategies to prepare for the new test, mastery prep solutions that will help you build confidence toward that test, and much more. For now, enjoy the rest of the summer, and we'll see you soon.